First of all, from Chef, we have Galen Emery, a CISSP certified security professional focusing on audit, system hardening, and security's role in DevSecOps pipelines and teams. He has extensive background in building hardened systems and implementing efficient and secure development methodologies to ensure delivery of a continuous and evolving security posture. At Chef, Galen works as the lead compliance and security architect, helping organizations across the globe achieve secure and compliant infrastructure by design. From Veracity Solutions, we have Lonnie Buchanan, the Chief Architect and Executive Security Director with an impressive background in management and business architecture. Lonnie comes to us after being Director of Enterprise IS Architecture for the entire Intermountain Healthcare Organization, overseeing both the enterprise architecture and telehealth programs. His impact with telehealth led the way for next-level patient and clinician interaction and progressive technology-based health-related services. In fact, the success of the program quickly gained popularity for saving the lives of countless children with complicated illnesses. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Lonnie.
Well, thank you very much. The question that we have is, where are you at today? In a world that is in a constant digital journey, the question becomes is where is your organization at today? Are you growing your business? Are you rebuilding your business? Or are you just trying to maintain your business? The point is that there are definite steps along a path of transformation that we should be aware of in order to be successful. Now, among all of these steps one can take on their journey, there's one very critical one that we just cannot overlook, nor in my personal opinion can ever be emphasized enough, and that is the area of compliancy and security. Now, along those lines, Gartner predicts that infrastructure-led disruption will enable I&O leaders to be known by the innovation they provide to business leaders and not by the infrastructure they manage. So the question is, what is the problem that we're dealing with? Now, the problem that many of us face is the fact that there are several key areas of HIPAA compliancy that have to be adhered to. Now, HIPAA rules and regulations have occurred and been modified and adjusted over time. Most recently, the 21st Century Cures Act has been mandated, and the final rule went into effect in March. The goal of the ONC's Cures Act final rule is actually really simple. It's about access to choice. Patients should be able to access their electronic medical record at no additional cost. And providers should be able to choose the IT tools that allow them to provide the best care for patients without excessive cost or technical barriers. Even under Section 4004, information blocking can expose entities to fines of upwards of $1 million per violation. The point is, HIPAA regulations continue to be changing, and it's each business's responsibility to know and follow those rules. Galen, don't you agree?
Absolutely, Lonnie. And the key thing here is that what we're finding is that the core part of the problem is actually in the process itself. And what we're finding is that these manual processes are dated and siloed and are separate between the various groups of the organization, between the operations side, between security, between the compliancy and auditing teams as well. And they happen too late in the process. And so this is going to lead us into the questions that we think we need to ask. And so the questions we want you to consider while you're listening to us today as you go back to your organizations to talk about HIPAA compliance with your teams and your security teams are these ones. Have you automated any of your compliance processes, or are they still manual? Where does your security and compliance review happen during your development process? And how capable are you of handling a breach, including the notification requirements that are put forth in HIPAA?
Now, in order for us to understand how to address this problem, we have to understand what is the current direction of technology. As we look forward to technology trends, there are several elements that stand out when we talk about these future directions. The most obvious is the combination of technologies that are smart, such as artificial intelligence and machine learning. Digital, now that's the continuation of the digital revolution through the adoption of digital transformation and digital innovation. And connected through the power of the internet and digital workplaces. These three are evident in almost every single aspect of our modern world. For example, smartphones and devices are connected together, delivering digital ecosystems. And digital twins produce digitally replicated simulations across vast cloud-hosted solutions that are learning as they're being used. And when we look at these trends, there's one aspect that cuts across all of them that just cannot be ignored, and it is the concern for individual businesses and governments in the areas of privacy and ethics. So in our digital journey, now we see how all of this is actually connected together. Now, with all that connected, what is the actual answer? So the actual answer is the progression to intent. So let's talk a little bit about this for a minute. So behaviors are these low-level actions that occur in a system. And these are the details and individual components that kind of come together. The next are models, and they represent the plan or the map. And they're the framework or specific collection of low-level actions that then they come together and create a specific outcome. Models can be considered such things as like a CI/CD pipeline. It's a framework for automation, maybe request-based or push-based or even event-based. But in healthcare, it is the framework which developers use to deploy code through the various environments. And it could be the governance framework used in provisioning that infrastructure. Now, policies prescribe the proper course of action. They're the plans or the guideline used to make a decision. They can be seen as like a contract. If something occurs, what are the steps needed to react to an issue? These can be seen in various policies that healthcare facilities must follow, such as guidelines for secure access control. Intent is that final result that we're shooting for. Let's say that we want to be ISO 27000 2013 compliant, or I want to be HIPAA compliant. Intent is where we want to go and what we want to accomplish. So when we put it all together, we see that we use scripts to manage the behaviors. The model provides a framework or programmatic description of how we want the target state to look. And policies define the requirements and constructs of the model. And the intent expresses the overall goals of the complete system. See, many enterprise IT organizations are stuck in behavior-based configuration management. And for those that are thinking about modernization, many will still only focus on moving to model-based methods. However, intent is the more advantageous and complete process. Intent-based management can create an infrastructure that's actually self-governing. Why don't you show us a little bit more of this in detail, Galen?
Absolutely. Thanks, Lonnie. So if the intent is to go for HIPAA compliance, and to maintain that automatically or continuously, we need to have a policy that allows us to do that. And what we need to do is to define that compliance policy as code. It's the only way for us to scale this to manage the complexity of our systems. That policy has to have 4 key components to it. One, we have to have an authority. We have to know who is signing off on this policy from the organizational level. We need to have the controls we want to follow. We're saying we must do these particular things on our systems, on our infrastructure, in our networking devices, all these types of pieces. We need to have the context or the metadata about why those particular controls are valuable or important to getting towards that intent of HIPAA compliance. And we need to have an integrity check. We need to have the ability to validate that when this policy runs against our systems, that it is in fact actually modeling against the intent that we've defined in our security policy or security intent at the high level. And so if we want to take that policy and actually apply it through our entire workflow, there's a couple parts of the process. Starting in the top right, we need to acquire a baseline. We need to say, hey, where does this come from? Who are we getting it from? Typically, we see our customers use CIS as the baseline policy. We then need to define that specific to our organizational goals and requirements. Again, our intent is to go for HIPAA compliance. We need to make sure we have all the context for HIPAA. We need to turn on the appropriate things that might be greater than the core baseline we take from the industry, or maybe remove some things that don't work for our particular environment. We use it to define what our view of the world should be, model that intent. use that to detect the actual state of the systems, go through the process of fixing, remediating all the systems that have potential issues as we go through this, and reporting upon that state continuously. And by making this a continuous workflow, we're going to get that continuous visibility, that continuous compliance that we want to always be in a state of compliance readiness. And so when we apply this continuous compliance workflow to our methodologies and pair this with an effective DevOps pipeline, or DevSecOps pipeline more specifically, we can get to what we're calling the human-free zone, which is to say we're removing humans' ability to access production. And when we're thinking about things about HIPAA compliance, really a lot of the controls, a lot of the things we're talking about are, again, that access to patient data, the access to patient confidentiality. Those things are made a lot simpler by removing humans from the actual process in production. So we have a continuous view of the compliance state of the fleet, and I can prove programmatically that my operators, my humans, don't have access to production data, further reducing the risk and further increasing our chance of getting compliance and maintaining compliance through the entire cycle. And so by combining these two things together, we get to a state of continuous compliance. And what that allows us to do is to be validating compliance continuously through the entire development lifecycle and all the way out to production. So while that's great and important from the architecture perspective, let's talk about some real-world examples of companies actually making this happen in practice. And this is one of the key components we want to focus on when we're talking about these examples, talking about these companies, is that we actually have an advantage by having to deal with HIPAA compliance. We understand one of the key business outcomes that need to be included or done appropriately from our business perspective. There are large-scale fines that exist on the other side of the fence if we get this wrong, right? So not only is it important from a business continuity perspective, but really focus on understanding what the negative risk is if we don't get this right. And for some specific examples on that, I'm going to hand it back over to Lonnie.
Thanks, Galen. You know, recently there was a very large state-based agency which was imposed with a penalty. The Office for Civil Rights, the OCR at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, fined them $1.6 million for a single security breach. In this case, an internal application was moved from a private secure server to a public server. And then the application actually had flaws in the software code that allowed access to EPHI without access controls. About over 6,000 individuals' information was viewable over the internet, and that included names and addresses, social security numbers, and treatment information. It was found that this organization failed to conduct an enterprise-wide risk analysis, nor did they implement access and audit controls on its information systems and applications as required by HIPAA security rules. Because of inadequate audit controls, they were unable to determine exactly how many unauthorized persons access the individual's information. Galen has also a couple of other examples to talk about. Galen, why don't you bring those up?
Thanks, Lonnie. So yeah, let's talk about some organizations that have been doing this well and right. First off, let's talk about Cerner. Cerner obviously is a very large healthcare organization, and what they've really been able to focus on is no longer manually maintaining the lifecycle of systems or human judgment and processes that didn't scale or removed. Really, again, removing the humans from that process. Really key to allowing us to achieve that automatic continuous compliance. And another great example on the positive side is Optum Healthcare. What they've really focused on is shifting security and compliance left into the lifecycle, allowing their development teams to use self-service security tools within the pipelines, giving them that rapid feedback well before a change gets anywhere near production, really reducing the cycle times required through the security review, as really pointed out, focusing on security as part of I&O as a key component of their business outcome.
This is great information. Thank you both. And before we answer questions, I just want to remind you all that Chef's annual conference has gone digital, and it is now called ChefConf Online. Please go to the link you see here below, chefconf.io, and register to learn more about topics like this one that you heard today. And best of all, you don't have to travel, and there's no cost to attend. We hope to see you there. At this point, we will take questions. So please continue to submit your questions in the Q&A widget on your screen. and I'll read them to our speakers to be answered. Okay, it looks like we've got a few questions in the queue. First one, how does adopting compliance as code change how customers will deal with audits?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take this one. One of the key things we see when people adopt compliance as code in response to audits is that it really simplifies the process part of your audit cycle. So really focused on all that work you do, focusing on how do I prove access control, how do I prove appropriate authority controls. All that stuff changes when you put it into compliance as code and put it as part of a pipeline. It's a really key differentiator for companies that have adopted compliance as code compared to companies that are still doing manual changes in production, human-based access, all that kind of stuff changes at a very real sense.
Yeah, and Galen, I'll just echo that. If anybody's ever been through an audit, realizes how time-consuming it can be, and whenever we make it in an automated process, we greatly reduce that time factor from there. So it really increases efficiency around audits themselves. It even goes one step farther in the fact that oftentimes whenever someone goes through an audit, there's very key specific things that people are looking at and looking for. And so likewise, there's certain things that are missed. Whenever we change our compliance to a code-based factor, then we can actually cover more bases and actually make things way more secure than they were previously.
Thanks, guys. We have a specific one here. So one of our most audit-heavy applications is mostly on-prem, but it has a lot of distributed cloud workloads. There are always questions about compliance with how we take advantage of our cloud workloads, mostly with AWS. And compliance as code helps remove some of the stigma here.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and get started. Of course it can, right? Compliance as code doesn't really care where your workload is. It's really just focused on making sure that we're always compliant as we do things. Obviously, as we work with the cloud, there's specific things we need to address there, and I'll go ahead and let Lonnie take care of that part of the question.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when we see people that are either a hybrid model or they're transitioning to the cloud, or maybe they're even new in the cloud, they're very nervous about some of the things that they're not familiar with or that are even maybe unknown. When we do this type of security and compliance around it, we also turn back to the business and give them more comfort by recognizing the fact that there are very specific standards that are being addressed, whether it be on-prem or in the cloud. And so when we use these types of things, as we were discussing in the webinar, is when we talk about intent, the intent of that particular thing is to be compliant, and maybe the case is compliant in the cloud. And so by reducing it to code, very fact-based structure, then we're able to hand that back to the organization and say, yes, you have met the compliancy regulations that you've put forth.
Okay. Next one. My team sees the benefits, but how do I get my security and risk teams on board?
Yeah, Lonnie, you want to go ahead and get started on that one?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Galen. So surprisingly, it's actually easier than what a lot of people think. Historically, what's happened is many security teams and compliance teams have either maybe originally formed under the IS umbrella and then shifted out into their own organization, or in the case of compliancy, they may have shifted from the business, more of the legal side, the procurement side, and shifted into their own areas. And what's happened across the development of those particular teams is they've often been left out or relegated to being after the fact, maybe right before deployment, validate the security. And so what happens is just naturally those security and compliance teams are felt outside of the process. They may have issues that they felt have not been put into the code structure, or put into the pipeline, or things like that. And so whenever you bring something such as compliance as code to the table and use a product like Chef, it's relatively easy for them to understand how those standards are being implemented, and so they feel that they're part of that. Also, this type of structure gets them involved earlier in the pipeline itself, and so we can bring those teams in and address those issues to begin with. Also, in particular, though, because the code is so easy to change and update and keep up to date, if there's new regulations that enter into the marketplace, it's very easy to put those into the structure themselves and allow for them to be checked continuously through the process.
Okay. Next question. And how is access controlled for this type of application? It has access to sensitive information, which is why I'm asking.
Yeah, so this is going back to the compliance as code piece, right? The data you generate from this, which is to say your state of the world afterwards, that's of course potentially sensitive. That gives people a blueprint to the security state of your systems. So if you're using our tooling, we have full role-based access control in place to allow you to specify who should see what information down to which systems people have access to see information about, because obviously it's very important. People should not have access to these things outside of it. And again, this leads back into a lot of the access control things we have to put into place in our systems are a result of the fact that we rely upon humans to manually make changes to systems. If we apply automation and DevSecOps and put things into a pipeline, we really get into this structure where we can get this kind of human-free zone of production. And as we do that, we really reduce the access control requirements and the auditing requirements necessary to maintain our compliance and production. So really, on both cases, we restrict the level of access in the dashboards because obviously the data is sensitive. And by adopting compliance as code, we really allow for the majority of the humans to get removed from production in the first place, right? Development doesn't need to have access to production. Development just sees what their systems say out of the development environment and will know if they're going to pass production or not. Lottie, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think you covered that great, Galen. I appreciate that.
All right. And generally, what separates successful organizations from the rest?
I'll take that one. So, one of the things that I've seen whenever what separates a successful organization from the rest of the pack is there are lots of fundamental things, but probably one of the most important things that I see is the ability to execute. And that in turn follows with the ability to execute quickly. You don't necessarily have to be the first guy to invent something, and quite frankly, you don't even necessarily have to be the best in many cases. But if you can't deliver a product, then no one's ever even going to have the opportunity to buy it. And so as we continue to grow in this very fast-paced economy in a very fast-paced world, it's going to be the companies that can execute and execute efficiently and execute very quickly that are going to separate them from the pack. Galen, you have anything else on that?
No, Lottie, I think you hit it perfectly. I think it's exactly it of that innovation.
Thanks.
And it looks like we have one more question. How do I get my team started converting our platform to code?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start off. I think the first thing is you have to have an understanding of what are we trying to pass from a compliance perspective, right? Obviously talking about HIPAA, but how do we map that to actual security controls in the system? And then you just focus on your typical work process. Start chunking off pieces of work and starting making process. Getting those tests into your development pipeline is a key component of having that continuous compliance view. And really start showing little wins, right? The more little wins you can get, the more people you can get to show it to, the more people are going to get excited. As Lonnie mentioned about getting security teams involved earlier, that's how we're going to get everybody involved and on the same page and working towards the common goal. Lonnie, do you have anything to add from your experience?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Galen. I mean, really, it's all about getting people used to monitoring their systems, getting them used to being able to correct it very quickly, and enforcing those regulations associated with that. it's a little bit different, like what we were talking about from security and compliance. Now we want to get the business heavily involved with this and understanding how they can be a part of delivering successful code to their clients and their end users.
Thanks, guys. I don't see any other questions in the queue, so I would just like to thank everybody for attending today. And as a reminder, we will be sending out this recording on demand, so keep your eye out for an email from Chef. And I'd really like to thank our speakers today, Galen and Lonnie, especially thanking Veracity Solutions for their expertise on this subject. And if you'd like to learn more about this topic, please do go to chefcomp.io and register for ChefComp online, and we'll be discussing this in greater detail. Thanks, everyone.